everyone, so it's Sarah Johnson from Homes for Harrogate, and today I'm with Laura from Harrogate Family Law. Hi Laura.
Hello.
So Laura's a solicitor at the firm, and today she's going to help us look at some issues regarding divorce and separation and how it might affect some of my clients. Obviously it's not the nicest thing for people to go through, but it does happen, unfortunately. So Laura, quite a few of my tenants, and especially in sort of high-end luxury apartments, when they're doing viewings, I find out are in the middle of a separation and they're looking for somewhere to live. What do they need to know before they move out of the family home?
I'm glad you asked, because this is something I come across all the time, particularly these days, because divorces are probably taking on average around 12 months from beginning to end, which is a really long time for people to be living in the same house. Typically I would say men want to move out of the house because they're worried about being in an uncomfortable and volatile environment for a long period of time potentially. They also feel pressured sometimes that that's the right thing for them to do if they have more money. They might have somebody else, like a new girlfriend say, and actually the biggest reason is probably because they want to protect the children from being exposed to arguments and that sort of thing. Moving out, I would say, tends to happen more often than not. But it can be a really costly mistake if you don't get a couple of things sorted out first. So for example, by moving into rented accommodation, your ex might say, well, you're totally happy with being in rented accommodation, which might mean it's more difficult for you to get as much money from the house or to even get your money now rather than waiting for a couple of years. The other thing is you might end up paying for both your rented accommodation and the family home, which that's a lot of money potentially, which can cause people financial difficulties when you're already really stressed. A big thing is you might agree to pay your ex whilst they're in the family home more than they actually need. So they have no reason to really work and to support themselves, and they might expect you to keep paying that amount of money at the end, which for you, why would you want to pay more than you need to pay? A big disadvantage can be that your ex then has no reason to listen to you when it comes to sorting out the arrangements for the children. So you've lost a lot of leverage there, and the children need to have a good relationship with you. So that's not something to throw away, really. And the final thing is that your ex then basically has everything that they want out of your settlement. They're in the family home, they might have arrangements for the children that are on their terms, and they've got very little reason to sort things out with you. So you don't want someone dragging their feet when you want to move on with your life.
No. So obviously if staying in the home isn't ideal and they do want to rent it, it's something they can do, but they probably need to get a bit of advice first and just think about it carefully.
Yeah, because you want to be as much as possible amicable with your ex. So if staying in the family home is not going to do that and potentially mean that it takes longer for both of you to move on with your lives, moving out can be the right thing for you to do. You just need to get those things sorted out first before you lose your bargaining power, basically.
Okay, so flipping it around, as opposed to it being a tenant looking for somewhere to rent, if I've got a landlord clients who've got property portfolios and they're going through a divorce, what happens with that portfolio on divorce that they jointly own and that we might manage for them?
Yeah, that's another really good question. It's quite complicated to answer because a portfolio of property is both capital but also an income stream. So the starting point when you get divorced is to divide the assets that are built up in the marriage equally, but more often than not, I would say one person gets more than the other person if it's fair for them to have more. Now, those are very elastic terms, and that will come down to how good of a negotiator you have, really. But the first step is always to work out what actually goes into the pot that needs to be divided. So if you had the portfolio prior to your marriage, it might mean it doesn't automatically go into the pot. But really, if you want to have the best start with that, you should have a prenup put in place. Otherwise, you're kind of on the back foot to begin with. So it's not just about looking what goes into the pot, it's also about looking at how much all of those things worth. Now, a property portfolio is quite interesting because a big strategic decision is how it's valued. So, for example, those properties might have development potential, they might have tenancies in place, there might be third-party interests, and how you handle those things might mean that you end up with a better or worse settlement. And in particular, it'll affect how easy it will be for you to hold on to those properties. The other thing people don't think about is liquidity. So what that means is, yes, these properties have a capital value, but how easily can you actually raise money from those properties to buy the other person out? So you need to look at what else is in that pot, how quickly you can raise the money, and what are the different methods for doing that. And something people tend to forget about is tax. So you might end up, if you don't structure something in the right way, paying more tax than you should have done. And some people forget about tax altogether, which means you might have a debt to pay, which you might not have taken account of. So if you want to keep the portfolio, all of those things need to be handled really carefully. Otherwise, there's a higher risk you won't be able to hold on to it, or you might end up giving your ex more of the financial settlement when you shouldn't have done. And obviously there's other things like, can you release them from the mortgage? What if the tenants vacate the properties? Who pays for the shortfall? Who gets the rent in the interim? So there's a lot of things that need to be looked at, but certainly, you know, it doesn't mean you can't hold on to the properties, it's just how it works out.
Not an easy question to answer, but thank you for trying.
I'm not sure it's an answer.
Prenup's probably not the most romantic word, but it might be worth looking into it. If any of my landlords are considering getting married and they've got a portfolio, it might be worth looking at that before.
The way I like to think about it is it's like having life insurance. You hope you're never going to have to use it, but if you do have to use it, at least you've got a better starting point that you have thought through before you've entered that marriage. Family law is really discretionary, so why wouldn't you want to have as much certainty as possible over what might happen if unfortunately your relationship breaks down?
Good point. So as opposed to any of my clients thinking they're going to go down the DIY divorce route, could you tell us, obviously, I mean, you've explained to me, but why it is so much better for them to speak to a professional and get some help?
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand why people worry about seeing a lawyer. I think a lot of people worry that we're going to make things worse. Perhaps they think that things are straightforward and we might make things more difficult for them. And also, you know, people worry about legal fees, and I understand that. What I hear often is, you know, can I afford to get divorced and can I afford to pay you? The thing to think about is, yes, there's a cost to paying a lawyer, but potentially how many hundreds of thousands of pounds might you save in getting the right settlement? So I've already touched upon a couple of things that, if you're a landlord, need to be handled carefully and to make the right decisions, to make sure you get the best outcome possible. And that's why I have a job.
And so if somebody wants to get hold of you, Laura, what are your contact details?
So I tend to be around most of the time. The office number is 01423 594 680, or you can just look Harrogate Family Law up on the internet and you'll see all about us there.
Lovely, thank you so much for your help, it's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye everyone.